Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, I want you to picture a scene in your mind.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine a filthy, blood-stained mercenary from the ancient world. You know, a guy who has just finished a brutal military campaign.
Right, a really rough, hardened character.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And he marches up to his commanding officer, holds out a calloused hand, and demands his gold coins.
His payout.
Yes, his wages, the payout for his physical exhaustion, all that violence. Now, what if I told you that the specific Greek word used to describe that man's transactional, money-driven labor is the very same word the New Testament uses for the absolute highest, most holy form of spiritual worship a Christian can offer to God?
It sounds like a total contradiction,
Yeah,
honestly.
it really does, right?
Yeah, because when we use religious vocabulary today, we just assume those words have always possessed this, pristine, glowing aura.
Like they drop straight out of heaven.
Spot on. We open a Bible, we read the word worship, and we immediately think of, like, stained glass windows.
Yeah.
Or a quiet sanctuary, maybe a choir.
Right, a very reverent congregation.
Yes. We assume the biblical authors pulled these words from some ethereal realm, but the historical reality is, well, it's far more gritty.
And that is our mission for today's deep dive into the source material. We're going to look behind the scenes of our English translations.
Which is always a wild ride.
It is. We are examining two highly specific Greek words. The verb is latreio, and the noun is latreia.
Okay.
And to do this, we are pulling data from resources that translators actually use. Things like the TDNT and BDAG.
Right, the heavy academic lexicons.
Yeah, but before we jump in, could you give a quick, plain English explanation of what those acronyms mean? I mean, I don't want anyone getting lost in the weeds before we even start.
Oh, absolutely. So BDAG is simply an abbreviation for the standard Greek-English lexicon used by scholars.
Basically a massive dictionary.
Yeah, it is the ultimate dictionary for ancient Greek.
Yeah.
It tracks how a word was used in everyday life, on the streets.
And what about TDNT?
TDNT stands for the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. And rather than just giving a quick definition, it tracks the entire historical life cycle of a word.
Oh, wow. So it gives you the whole story.
It really does.
Yeah.
It shows you how a word started in classical Greek literature, then how it changed when the Old Testament was translated into Greek, and finally how the New Testament authors utilized it.
That is extremely helpful. So we are going to use those tools to track the astonishing trajectory of a single concept, because words matter intensely.
They really do. If we want to understand how God demands we approach him, we have to understand the vocabulary he inspired.
Right. So we're going to watch how a secular marketplace term for, working for wages slowly shifted across centuries.
Until it described a Christian's total devotion to God.
Yes. So for you listening, just sit back, because tracing this linguistic evolution completely alters how you view your daily life, your job, and your standing before God.
The shift is so jarring. When you investigate the historical origins of Latreuō, it forces you to reevaluate what it actually means to bring your life before the Lord.
It totally shatters our modern preconceptions.
It does. The etymology of this word drags us out of that quiet sanctuary and throws us right into the dirt, the sweat, and the noise of the ancient marketplace.
Well, let's start right there in the dirt. Before we even open the biblical text, we need to understand what this word meant to a standard ancient Greek citizen walking the streets of Athens.
Or maybe a laborer working down at the shipping docks.
Yeah. If you walked up to someone in the classical Greek period, hundreds of years before Christ, and used the word Latreuō, what would pop into their head? I'm guessing not angels or incense.
Absolutely not. If we break down the etymology, the root of our word is latron.
Oh, litra, okay.
And in ancient classical Greek, latron meant wages or reward. It was an entirely transactional concept.
So purely about getting paid.
Purely. You'd perform a task, you expend calories, and you receive your latron, your physical payment. And from that root, we get the noun latris, which referred to a hireling or a hired worker.
Like a day laborer.
Spot on. This was someone who sold their physical energy, their bodily sweat, for a paycheck.
Which brings us back to that mercenary image I mentioned in the intro. There is a Latin cognate for this word, correct?
There is, yes.
And it carries a much darker, almost violent connotation, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
The Latin cognate is Latreuō. And in Latin, Latreuō came to describe a robber or a mercenary bandit.
Wow, a robber.
Yeah, a Latreuō was someone who took money by force, like a soldier of fortune who labored solely for the violent acquisition of a payout.
That is wild.
So whether you were looking at the Greek latris or the Latin latro, the foundation of this word family is entirely wrapped up in acquiring money, wages, and reward.
It's just about physical exertion for earthly gain.
That is the core idea.
Now, the sources mention that the oldest known use of our specific verb, latreuō, is found in a 6th century Eleusinian inscription.
That's right.
Tell us a bit about that, because a 6th century BC Greek stone carving is about as far from the New Testament epistles as you can get.
Oh, for sure. So the Eleusinian mysteries were these secret religious rites in ancient Greece, but the inscription itself uses the word in a very practical, administrative way.
So not in some mystical sense.
Not at all. And as we track the verb latreio through secular non-biblical Greek literature, the usage remains remarkably grounded in physical toil. It is not ethereal.
Do we have any specific examples from Greek authors?
We do. For example, the ancient playwright Sophocles uses latreio to describe the agonizing bodily labor of the mythical hero Heracles.
Wait, really? The labors of Heracles.
Yeah. When Heracles is sweating, straining his muscles, and performing those grueling mythical tasks, Sophocles calls that latreio.
So it is practically synonymous with exhaustion.
Precisely. And then you have the historian Xenophon. He uses the word to describe the intense physical exertion of slavery.
Man, that is heavy.
He also uses it metaphorically for strictly obeying the laws of the state, which still implies submitting to a rigorous, demanding system. It always involves submitting to a grueling task.
What about other classical authors? Are there more figurative uses, or does it always mean like lifting heavy stones and plowing fields?
There are figurative uses, but they still carry that heavy, laborious weight. Like the order Isocrates talks about people who are working for beauty.
Working for beauty, what does that mean?
He means individuals who are striving, agonizing, and putting in intense effort to achieve aesthetic perfection.
Oh, I see.
And the Sad Resolution discusses those who labor for pleasure, meaning people who completely exhaust themselves trying to acquire carnal, physical satisfaction.
But notice the common thread there. It is always an exertion of effort directed toward a specific earthly payoff.
Always.
Okay, let me offer an analogy to the listener to make sure we are grasping the secular nature of this word.
Go for it.
Imagine taking a modern transactional, highly corporate word like freelancer or maybe independent contractor.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. Picture someone who signs a W-9 tax form, logs their billable hours on a spreadsheet, and just waits for a direct deposit to hit their bank account. Their entire motivation is the wage.
Yeah, it's entirely transactional.
Imagine taking a word that is entirely based on getting paid and suddenly applying it to the way we approach a holy, sovereign God. It feels ironic.
Very ironic.
We are looking at a word based entirely on acquiring a wage, and yet it becomes the bedrock for our theological concept of rendering worship.
That analogy is spot on. It captures the dissonance perfectly. In classical Greek, if you wanted to talk about honoring the gods or showing reverence to a divine being, you typically used a completely different word.
What word was that?
Therapeuin.
Okay, therapeuin.
Yeah, and that word carried the idea of care, veneration, and religious respect. It had a dignified tone.
But Latreuō.
Latreio was gritty, everyday labor. It possessed no inherent holy glow whatsoever. It was the word for the hired hand plowing the field, not the priest offering the incense.
See, I have to push back here, or at least ask the obvious question. How on earth did a word for freelance labor enter the biblical vocabulary?
It's a great question.
If a Greek citizen associated this word with getting a paycheck or sweating in the fields, how does it become the go-to term for rendering duties to Yahweh? What bridges the gap between the Athenian docks and the Jerusalem temple?
To answer that, we really have to look at the translation of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek.
Ah, okay. The Septuagint.
Yes. This translation is known as the Septuagint, often referred to by the Roman numerals LXX.
Let's pause and give a quick history lesson on the Septuagint for the listener. Why was the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek in the first place?
Well, following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek became the dominant language of the ancient world.
Right, Hellenization.
Exactly. I mean, That's right. By the 3rd century BC, there was a massive population of Jewish people living in Alexandria, Egypt, and they spoke Greek as their primary language.
So they couldn't read the original text anymore.
Right. They could no longer read the ancient Hebrew of their ancestors. So Jewish scholars took on the monumental, painstaking task of translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek.
And as they worked, they had to make highly specific, very deliberate vocabulary choices.
Massive choices.
And when it came to our word, Latreuō, The research shows they used it about 90 times, but they used it almost exclusively to translate one specific Hebrew word.
Yes, the Hebrew word abad.
Let's break down a bad.
So the Hebrew word abad is extremely common and very broad. It basically just means to work, to labor, or to act as a slave.
Just general labor.
Pretty much. An Israelite could abad in their agricultural fields digging in the dirt, or they could bad for a human master as an indentured servant. It covered almost any kind of work.
So abad is a catch-all term. How did the Greek translators handle such a broad word?
What the translators did with their bad is brilliant, and it shows immense theological care. They look at the context of every single occurrence in the Hebrew text. If the text was talking about humans doing physical labor for other humans, like working for an employer, or acting as a slave to a human master, they translated it using the Greek word doulion.
And doulion is the standard Greek word for being a slave, being in bondage, or being subjugated to another person.
Correct. That handled the human-to-human labor. But when the Hebrew text described religious, cultic, and sacrificial rituals directed at Yahweh, or conversely directed at pagan idols, they refused to use doulion.
They switched words entirely.
Yes. Instead, they almost exclusively used our gritty marketplace word, latreio.
Wow. They intentionally built a linguistic wall.
A massive one. They deliberately separated secular human-to-human work from the religious labor rendered to God.
That's a huge distinction.
They decided that when a human works for another human, it is one thing. But when a human brings an animal to the altar, sheds his blood, and renders duties to the Creator, that requires a distinct category.
But why choose Latreuō? If they had the word therapeuin available, which meant religious veneration, why use the word for a hired hand seeking a wage?
Because Old Covenant worship was incredibly physical. It was laborious.
Oh.
Think about it. It involved slaughtering animals, hauling wood, lifting heavy sacrifices, and maintaining a massive tent in the wilderness. It was exhausting work.
It was literally a bloody, sweaty job.
Yes. The translators needed a word that captured the physical sweat and effort of the Levitical system, while simultaneously dedicating that effort entirely to God. Latreuō fit perfectly.
Because it retained the idea of intense physical labor.
Right, but the translators elevated the object of that labor from a human boss to the Lord of hosts.
That makes a lot of sense. And the data shows that the distribution of this word in the Septuagint is extremely uneven. It is not scattered equally across all the books of the Old Testament, is it?
Not at all. Out of the 90 instances in the Greek Old Testament, 70 of them are packed densely into just 4 books.
Which ones?
Exodus, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges.
Okay, logically, that aligns perfectly with the historical narrative of the nation of Israel. I mean, Exodus is the story of God pulling his people out of grueling physical bondage in Egypt.
Right.
And he does this specifically so they can minister to him in the wilderness. Let's look closely at Exodus 3.12 and 7.16. This is the famous confrontation, right?
The showdown with Pharaoh.
Yeah. Moses stands before Pharaoh, the absolute monarch of Egypt, and says, "Let my people go, that they may Latreuō me in the wilderness."
Yes.
Now, we usually read that in our English Bibles as, "Let my people go, that they may worship me." But based on everything we were discussing, God is not just asking Pharaoh for permission to let the Israelites go sing some hymns in the desert.
Far from it. When Moses uses the Hebrew equivalent, and the Greek translators use Latreuō, he is demanding the release of a captive labor force.
A captive labor force?
Yes, so that they can go perform literal, physical, sacrificial rituals for Yahweh. God is laying claim to their labor.
Because think about what they were doing in Egypt. They were making bricks in the hot sun. They were building massive store cities for Pharaoh.
They were expending all their physical energy for a tyrant.
And God steps in and says, "That labor belongs to me."
Yes. Now, instead of building mud bricks, they are going to slaughter lambs. They're going to build a complex tabernacle out of animal skins and bronze.
Right. The tabernacle construction was no joke.
They're going to haul those materials across the desert and perform the rigorous physical labor of the Levitical system for Yahweh. It was a total transfer of ownership.
God was saying, "You will no longer labor for Pharaoh's vanity. You will labor for my glory."
That is precisely what was happening.
That adds so much weight to the Exodus narrative. The Israelites were literally exchanging one form of grueling physical labor under a cruel taskmaster for a completely different kind of rigorous physical labor directed entirely toward the living God.
A God who actually loved them and redeemed them.
Right. But I want to throw a curveball at you here. There is one striking exception in the research regarding how the Septuagint uses this word, It happens in Deuteronomy 28.48.
Oh, yes, the curses of the covenant.
Yeah. Moses is listing the curses. He tells Israel that if they rebel against God, God will send them into exile and they will Latreuō their enemies.
They will worship their enemies.
That seems like a glaring contradiction. If they built a wall between secular slavery and holy worship, why use the holy word here? Is this some sort of divine, sarcastic pun from the translators?
That is exactly, well, I should say, that is precisely what it is, and it carries massive theological weight.
How so?
Remember the strict rule the translators established? When you work for humans as a slave, you use doulion. When you render sacred duties to God, you use Latreuō.
Right, the linguistic wall.
But in Deuteronomy 28.48, they intentionally break their own rule. God is speaking through Moses, outlining the horrors of breaking the covenant. He essentially says, because you refuse to gladly Latreuō the God who sought your ultimate good, you will be condemned to literally Latreuō your vicious enemies who will destroy you.
Wow. So by using the sacred cultic word for worship and applying it to their future enslavement to the Babylonians or the Assyrians, God is making a terrifying point.
It demonstrates God's absolute sovereignty over both covenant blessings and covenant curses. Humans are wired by their Creator to render this intense, consuming labor to something. You cannot escape it.
You have to worship something.
Yes. If Israel refuses to direct their Latreuō toward Yahweh in the joy of the tabernacle, God will ironically and painfully force them to direct their Latreuō toward pagan conquerors in the misery of exile.
They will render their sacred energy to a profane master.
It is a brilliant, devastating use of the vocabulary.
It is chilling when you think about the application. I mean, for you listening, think about that. You will render your life's labor to someone. You either render it to the God who redeems you, or you will render it to the tyrants who consume you.
There is no neutral ground?
None at all. So at this point in redemptive history, Latreuō is highly physical. It means showing up at the tabernacle. It means bringing an unblemished animal, slitting its throat, catching the blood in a basin, burning the fat on the bronze altar.
It is outward, bloody, and exhausting.
But if it meant outward animal sacrifices, how do we get to the modern Christian understanding of worship? Because today, if I walk into a church, I do not see anyone dragging livestock into the sanctuary.
No, thankfully.
The Old Testament itself actually begins moving this concept inward, doesn't it?
It does, and we see this shift beginning most clearly in the book of Deuteronomy. The text begins to reveal that God wants far more than just the mechanical motions of a sacrifice.
Where do we see that?
Look specifically at Deuteronomy 10.1-13. In this passage, Moses commands Israel regarding what Yahweh actually requires of them, and the physical ritual of the altar is no longer the sole focus.
What does he say?
Moses says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to Latreuō the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul."
With all your heart and all your soul. That is a massive paradigm shift from just handing a goat to a priest.
It is staggering. The physical actions of the tabernacle were never meant to be empty mechanics. This internal disposition requires fear, it requires love, it requires keeping the commandments.
It's a total posture of the inner man.
Yes, just a few verses later, Moses tells them to circumcise the hardness of their heart. True Latreuō demands the total engagement of the inner person. The outward physical labor is completely void if the inward reality is corrupt.
I really want you, the listener, to consider how radical this was in the ancient Near East. Think about the gods of the surrounding nations. You know, the gods of the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Philistines.
And pagan deities.
Right. Those pagan deities only wanted physical appeasement. They wanted meat, they wanted grain, they wanted a cold, calculated transaction. You give the idol a goat, the idol gives you rain for your crops. It was a bribe.
A literal transaction.
But Yahweh steps into human history and says, I do not just want your grain. I do not just want your livestock. I demand the entire inner life. I demand your affections, your loyalty, your mind, and your heart.
And this perfectly mirrors the biblical truth that outward rituals are entirely useless if the inner person remains unregenerate.
Oh, absolutely.
You can go through all the physical motions of Latreuō, you can bring the most expensive, unblemished sacrifices, but if your heart is hard and rebellious, God actively rejects the offering.
We see this tension highlighted vividly in Joshua 24.1, don't we?
We do. Joshua gathers the people at the end of his life, and he sets this true inward worship in direct opposition to their sins and transgressions.
What's his warning to them?
He warns them that God is holy and jealous. He will not tolerate a divided heart hiding behind religious ceremonies. Joshua is telling them, you cannot Latreuō God while secretly holding on to your idols.
You can't fake it.
Right.
And as we move forward in history, closer to the time of Jesus and the New Testament era, this inward shift becomes even more pronounced in Jewish thought.
Yes, the progression is clear.
The research brings up the apocryphal book of Sirach, written roughly around 200 BC. In Sirach 4.1c, the word Latreuō becomes fully metaphorical. It is used to describe those who minister to wisdom.
That is a critical data point for tracking the evolution of the word.
Ministering to wisdom.
Yes. By the time of Sirach, the Greek-speaking Jewish world understood that Latreuō did not strictly require an altar and a sacrificial knife. Ministering to wisdom, dedicating your mind and your daily ethical choices to the pursuit of godly wisdom, was now being classified using the exact same verb used for slaughtering a Passover lamb.
That is incredible. The concept is expanding rapidly.
It is breaking out of the physical tabernacle courtyard and bleeding into the daily intellectual and moral life of the individual.
So let us recap the trajectory so far. We have traced this word from an Athenian day laborer looking for a physical wage, to an Israelite bringing a physical sacrifice to the tabernacle, to a Jewish thinker laboring for wisdom with his mind.
It's quite a shift.
It is, and this bridges us perfectly into the New Testament, where the verb appears 21 times. And to really grasp what happens next, we have to look at the book of Hebrews.
Hebrews is essential here.
Because Hebrews is the vital link between the old sacrificial system of the Torah and the new covenant established by the blood of Christ.
Hebrews does something radical with our vocabulary. To understand the magnitude of it, we have to remember another strict rule from the Greek Old Testament.
Another linguistic wall.
Yes. In the Septuagint, there was an impenetrable wall between two specific verbs, latreio and leitourgeō.
Let us define leitourgeō so we have a clear contrast.
Leitourgeō is the word from which we get our English word liturgy. In the Greek Old Testament, leitourgeō was reserved exclusively for the specific, highly restricted rituals of the Levitical priests.
So only the priests could do this.
Only the ordained sons of Aaron, wearing the priestly garments, could leitourgeō inside the holy place. They were the ones who tended the lampstand, offered the incense, and sprinkled the blood.
And what about everyone else?
The general congregation of Israel, the ordinary people, could only latreuō. They could bring the animal to the gate of the courtyard, but their access stopped there.
The priest took over from there.
Yes. The people worshipped from a distance, the priest officiated up close.
A strict division of labor and a strict division of access. The ordinary Israelite was separated from the Holy of Holies by a thick veil, strict laws, and a very exclusive priesthood.
Very exclusive.
If a common Israelite tried to leitourgeō, it would mean death. Look at Uzziah, for instance.
The spot on. The boundary was lethal. But the author of Hebrews intentionally obliterates this distinction.
How so?
In Hebrews chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 13, the author suddenly takes our word, latreio, and uses it to describe the high priests offering sacrifices inside the tabernacle.
But wait, I need to pause you right there. The author of Hebrews takes the word previously used for the common people standing outside the gate and applies it to the elite high priests standing at the altar.
He does.
Why? Why break such an established, centuries-old linguistic rule?
Because the author is preparing to level the entire playing field. He is tearing down the wall between the priesthood and the laity. He is showing that under the new covenant, the old categories are entirely obsolete.
Oh, man.
We see the theological explosion of this in Hebrews 9.1c. The text states, "How much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to Latreuō, the living God."
Purify our conscience from dead works. Let us unpack the theological weight here, especially from a Reformed perspective. Why does this conscience purging matter so much?
It matters because it deals with the core problem of total human depravity.
Right?
Under the old Levitical system, the blood of bulls and goats could only provide external ceremonial cleansing. It could wash the flesh, allowing someone to participate in the camp of Israel, but it could never reach the inner person.
An animal's blood could never cleanse a depraved, guilty conscience.
Never. The human conscience is naturally stained by what the author calls dead works, which are acts of self-righteousness, rebellion, and sin that earn nothing but spiritual death.
And a person with a depraved conscience cannot possibly approach a holy, pristine God.
They cannot truly Latreuō. They are completely incapacitated by their own sin. No amount of animal blood can fix a corrupt heart.
But the substitutionary atonement of Christ changes the equation entirely.
Fundamentally, Christ, acting as the perfect, sinless high priest, offers himself. He does not offer a goat, he offers his own blood. And his sacrifice achieves what millions of animal sacrifices over hundreds of years never could.
It actually pierces the inner person.
Yes, it purges the conscience, it completely removes the guilt and the stain of dead works. And the text tells us the specific, glorious result of this cleansing. It grants the believer the ability to Latreuō the living God.
Christ's perfect sacrifice grants the believer a holy capacity they never possessed naturally.
Yes, it is a massive structural shift.
I want to clarify the practical outcome of this because this is earth-shattering for the average person.
It really is.
Does this mean that because of the cleansing blood of Christ, the ordinary, everyday believer possesses the precise same access to God that was formerly restricted only to the high priest behind the veil?
Absolutely. That is the massive shift in redemptive history. Because your conscience is cleansed by the blood of the Son of God, you are no longer the common Israelite standing outside the gate hoping the priest does his job correctly to appease God's wrath.
You are not waiting outside anymore.
No. You have been brought near. You have been granted the priestly privilege. The barrier is gone. The veil is torn. You are now authorized to approach the throne of grace directly.
Which means the entire concept of worship has to expand dramatically. If every single believer has this priestly access, then Latreuō can no longer be confined to a physical building in Jerusalem.
It can't.
It cannot be limited to a specific geographic coordinate. It has to break out into all of life. And this is precisely what we see as we transition from Hebrews into the writings of Luke and Paul.
The expansion is incredible.
What does this worship look like outside of a physical temple with physical altars?
We see the definition immediately expanding into prayer and total life devotion. It becomes an ongoing posture of the soul.
Can you give a biblical example?
Sure. Look at Luke 2.37. Luke describes the prophetess Anna. She's an elderly widow who never leaves the temple area, and Luke says she is fasting and praying night and day.
Okay, fasting and praying.
And the verb Luke uses to summarize her continuous fasting and praying is Latreuō.
Wow. She is not slaughtering animals, she is praying.
Right. Her intense, unwearying prayer is categorized as the highest form of cultic worship. Her prayers are the incense.
That is beautiful.
We see the same thing in Acts 26.7. The Apostle Paul is on trial for his life, and he refers to the 12 tribes of Israel earnestly praying night and day, hoping to see the fulfillment of God's promises. Again, the word he uses for their earnest prayer is Latreuō.
So it is shifting from the altar of bronze to the posture of the heart. I also think about Luke 1.74 from Zechariah's song, often called the Benedictus.
Oh, that's a great passage to bring up.
Zechariah, who is an actual Levitical priest standing in the temple, prophesies about the coming Messiah. He looks forward to a day when God's people, having been delivered from the hands of their enemies, might Latreuō God without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all their days.
Notice the phrasing Zechariah uses there.
Right.
In holiness and righteousness. This is a direct echo of Deuteronomy.
True worship requires a life that aligns with the moral character of God.
Well, yes. It is not an event you attend once a week. It is a state of being all our days. It is a permanent status.
And no one champions this expansion more than the Apostle Paul. The lexical data details his highly distinct usage of the word.
All takes it to a whole new level.
In Romans 1.9, Paul writes, "For God is my witness, whom I Latreuō with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you."
He's talking about his daily missionary work there.
He is talking about traveling dangerous roads, preaching the gospel to hostile pagans, and agonizing in intercessory prayer for the churches he planted. He calls his missionary travels his Latreuō.
Paul takes the sacred, blood-soaked vocabulary of the Jerusalem temple and applies it to his exhausting, dust-covered tracks across the Roman Empire.
His travels are his temple service.
Yes. When he stands in a hostile marketplace in Corinth or Athens preaching Christ, he views himself as a priest rendering a holy duty to God. His spirit, fueled by the gospel, is the sanctuary.
And we see him draw a sharp line in the sand in Philippians 3.3. He contrasts false, fleshly religion with true Christianity.
What does he write there?
He writes, "For we are the circumcision who Latreuō by the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh."
Put no confidence in the flesh. That is the hinge of his entire argument.
I want to point out the incredible irony here to you listening. Think about where we started this discussion.
The Athenian docks.
Yeah. We started in ancient Greece, where the root of this word literally meant working to earn a physical wage. You sweat, you labor, you earn your money. It was the ultimate works-based concept.
Totally transactional.
Now, Paul takes this exact same word and uses it to describe a spiritual worship fueled entirely by the Spirit of God, where absolutely nothing can be earned by works of the flesh.
It is a total reversal of the word's DNA. The pagan day laborer believes his physical sweat forces the master to pay him.
Right.
The false religious teacher believes his physical rituals and moral sweat will force God to bless him. But Paul says true Latreuō realizes that the flesh accomplishes nothing. It earns nothing.
It is all grace.
True worship is generated entirely by the Holy Spirit dwelling within the believer. The ability to worship is a gift of unconditional grace, not a mechanism to earn a heavenly wage.
Everything we have discussed so far, from the Greek hirelings to the tabernacle sacrifices to the purging of the conscience to Paul's missionary journeys, it all culminates in the noun form of our word.
We have been mostly discussing the verb latreia.
Yes, and now we must examine the noun, latreia.
The noun form is surprisingly rare in the New Testament. It only appears 5 times across all the books.
Give us some examples of how it is used before we get to the pinnacle text.
Well, in Romans 9:4, Paul is lamenting for his fellow Jews who have rejected the Messiah. He lists the great historical advantages given to the nation of Israel: the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, and the latreia.
Okay, so how is it functioning there?
In this context, latreia refers specifically to the glorious, God-ordained temple rituals of the Old Covenant. It was a massive privilege to possess the divine blueprint for how to approach God.
And there is a much darker use of the noun in the Gospel of John, is there not?
Yes. In John 16:2, Jesus is warning his disciples about the intense, violent persecution they will face after he is gone.
What does he warn them about?
He tells them that an hour is coming when whoever kills them will think they are offering a latreia to God.
That is terrifying.
It really is.
People will murder Christians, genuinely believing that the act of execution is a holy, sacrificial duty, a latreia rendered to Yahweh. It shows how intimately tied the concept of bloody sacrifice was to this specific noun.
Absolutely. Even when the word becomes metaphorical in other contexts, it never completely detaches from the altar. There is always a sense of offering something up.
Which brings us to the pinnacle of this entire investigation, Romans 12:1.
Oh, yes.
This is arguably one of the most famous verses in the entire Bible, and it centers entirely on our noun.
Let's read it.
Paul writes, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship.
Or, as many translations render it, your logical or reasonable latreia.
The research quotes the German scholar Hermann Strathmann on this specific verse, and his analysis is brilliant.
What does he point out?
Strathmann points out that the concrete idea of sacrifice always clings to the noun latreia. Even when Paul spiritualizes it here in Romans 12, the word never loses the smell of the altar.
The smell of the altar. That is a visceral image.
It is meant to be visceral. When the Roman Christians read that word in Paul's letter, they immediately visualized a priest taking a dead animal, placing it on a bronze grate, and setting it on fire so that it was totally consumed in smoke.
Right, a total offering.
But Paul introduces a shocking paradox. The sacrifice on this altar is not a dead animal. It is the believer's own living body.
Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. He does not just say present your minds or present your spirits. He says your bodies.
Your physical hands, your vocal cords, your feet, your eyes.
Yes, your physical conduct in the material world. What you do with your hands matters. Where you walk matters. And he calls this your logical or reasonable latreia.
Why logical?
In the original Greek, the word is logikos. It means that in light of the staggering mercies of God outlined in the first 11 chapters of Romans, in light of justification by faith alone, the gift of the Spirit, the purging of the conscience, and the sovereign election of God, the only rational, logical response is to climb onto the altar yourself.
You are set apart from the liturgy, entirely devoted to God's purposes. I want you to really visualize this because it bridges the ancient text directly into your daily routine. Think about your life tomorrow morning.
Practically speaking.
When you are standing at the kitchen sink doing the dishes, or when you are waking up at 3 a.m. to care for a sick child, or when you are sitting in a gray cubicle doing your daily job to the glory of God. Are you literally mirroring a high priest burning an offering on a bronze altar? Is that what Paul is actually saying?
He is affirming precisely that. God's grace takes over the believer's entire existence. There is no longer a division between the sacred Sunday morning church service and the secular Monday afternoon staff meeting.
It is all one offering.
The daily, seemingly mundane actions of a Christian, when done in faith and reliance on the Spirit, become a fragrant offering to God.
It reclaims the original meaning of the word. The word started in ancient Greece as a description of physical, mundane labor for a paycheck, sweating in a field.
Right.
And now, under the new covenant, the physical labor of your daily life is reclaimed, elevated, and sanctified as the highest form of spiritual worship.
That is the genius of biblical theology. The ordinary is infused with the divine. The sweat of your daily vocation, the physical exhaustion of raising a family, the quiet discipline of personal integrity, the way you speak to your neighbors when these are offered to God in faith. They carry the same cultic weight as the incense burning in the Holy of Holies.
It changes everything.
God accepts your daily life as a holy offering because it is presented through the mediation of Jesus Christ.
Let us recap this massive linguistic evolution. We started in the dusty streets of ancient Athens, looking at a hired worker, a latris, who was exhausting his body simply because he wanted a few coins at the end of the day.
A completely secular transactional scene.
Then, the Jewish translators of the Septuagint took that gritty marketplace word and elevated it, applying it to the Israelite, bringing a physical lamb to the tabernacle to render cultic duties to Yahweh.
And then the prophets and Moses began to push the word inward, demanding that the heart be engaged, not just the hands.
And then the author of Hebrews obliterated the wall between the priest and the people, declaring that because Christ's blood has purged our depraved consciences, every single believer now possesses direct priestly access to the living God. The veil is gone forever.
Which culminated in the Apostle Paul telling us that our entire life, our physical bodies, our daily actions, our missionary endeavors, our prayers, is to be offered as a living sacrifice. The mundane becomes holy.
And as we close this session, I want to direct a final provocative thought specifically to you, the listener. Think about the radical irony of this word's history.
It is a massive reversal.
The word Latreuō originally meant working to earn a wage. It was fundamentally about merit. You do the work, you force the master to pay you what you are owed.
A debt is owed.
But the Christian gospel offers utter, unmerited grace. The New Testament declares that salvation cannot possibly be earned as a wage. It is a free gift purchased entirely by the blood of Christ.
You cannot earn it.
So how does that flip the motivation of your daily living sacrifice? When you wake up tomorrow to present your body as a living sacrifice in your home or at your job, you are no longer a hired hand working to earn a wage from God.
You are not sweating to force God to bless you.
You are offering your life, your time, and your body in staggering, joyful gratitude because the wage has already been paid in full by another. Your worship is no longer an attempt to earn salvation. It is the logical, beautiful response to a salvation you already possess.
That is a truth worth dwelling on.
Thank you for joining us as we track the history of this word. Until next time, keep reading the text closely, and thank you for listening to Reformed Thinking.